Right, so welcome to this new unnamed podcast from Tim Abel with guest David Sheardown. So we have yet to work out who this is for or what we're going to talk about, but that is the subject of this show. So the first question, as I've been learning in startup land, is define your audience. So I guess to put that in perspective, we need to just say a bit about who we are, and how we might be able to serve a particular audience. So I'm a programmer, an aspiring entrepreneur, been programming for quite a long time. David?
Well, I was just about to say almost the same, aspiring programmer, but aging aspiring programmer.
Not quite last week yet.
Not quite, but finding it a little bit harder to to take everything in. But yeah, more in recent years, sort of consultancy, everything from training to crikey knows what of integration systems. So yeah, sort of a bit of everything really.
And you got a permanent job, but you're a consultant.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yes, that comes up quite a bit as well. I mean, fits and spurts, type of thing. But I did miss. I'm still an aging, aspiring entrepreneur. It's still something that hasn't gone away. So there you go. So you're never too old to start.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the reasons I wanted you to join me on this little journey. We both have these aspirations.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's been there for and probably for you as well. But I'm fortunate because my partner, she's sort of got a similar sort of frame, and even though, and I think this is a key thing, is even though you might look back at your past and say, well, when is it going to kick in? When is that entrepreneurship actually going to happen? And it might happen, and then it might drop away, and it has done that actually in my lifetime, in a couple of periods of my life, I suppose. But the thing is, it's almost like if you naturally give up, that's okay, but if there's something, and I think that's probably what you've got as well, Tim, is if you've got that drive that it doesn't seem to go away. And it's not the fact that you're even trying to make it go away or not, but it's almost like it's just, what do they call it? The steady state, the background radiation. It's like there permanently. So
Sure
so
is.
I think it's if that's always there, and even though you try to ignore it, well, great, but it's the sort of thing that if it doesn't go away, then I think it's like I say, it's not necessarily a good or bad thing. I think it's just the fact that if you find yourself just keep getting drawn into this, then there's obviously something there that the universe is trying to nudge you into. So
I think definitely we've got in common that we both want to use the skills that we've got so far to help people with their challenges. Turning it into a business is a nice thing, and it makes it sustainable. But yeah, I've always liked programming because it, I get to know someone, employer or otherwise, and I see them struggling with something, or I see a possibility, and I make something, and now their lives are better, and I love it. And I'd like to do more of that under my own steam.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, and I'm not going to name any products because we're not in that type of show at the moment. But the products that I work with on a daily basis, funny enough, is it does address some quite difficult challenges, and it's an age-old thing. I mean, you've been around for a while, obviously, in this world, and I certainly have. And it seems to be the same problems in a lot of ways, but just different flavors and different complications that are layered on top of these things. But it's what you were saying, and that's what a lot of things that I do with whether it's training or workshops, etc. And it isn't me being super good at what I do even, but it's just the fact what you were saying there, when you see people light up because they've got real problems, they're obviously they're running businesses, they're having loads of issues with XYZ, or in my case trying to integrate something. And when you actually show them and they get it working, and it's not that difficult at the end of the day, but when they get to that point, yeah. But I was going to say, but when you've got things like tools that are really quite helpful or whatever it might be, but either way, you're absolutely right. It's not just saving time. It's like you say, it's saving energy, it's saving money, it's saving a company.
They don't necessarily, even if they could, they don't necessarily have the resources or time to sort a problem out.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's face it, given enough time, you could probably solve any problem, but there's your problem. That's the problem. So a lot of people don't have that.
In terms of this show, so to bring it back to audience, so I think that's quite a good little background in like what we've done to help people so far. But like this is a new adventure.
Sure is, yeah.
In a way, with what we do, the world is our oyster. Like we're not restricted to any particular vertical, as they call it. So we're not restricted to catering or government or even roles. Like we're not that restricted to director level or man on the ground programmer or salesperson or QA, because it's such a general purpose tool programming. So the challenge for what we're doing here is, so I'll put something first for like where I'm sort of coming from, which is I want to start building probably product based, but maybe some service based stuff to serve more people. So I would want that same audience to be interested in this kind of in what we're talking about. So there's a couple of options that I've come across. One would be serving the people who are following us in our journey. So people who are like a good option is the people who are a couple of steps behind in what we're currently doing. The stuff that sort of seems easy to us. Other people are trying to work out how they can get into it. So that's one option.
Yeah, sure.
Another option would be to serve like some particular sector, like some group of people like CEOs or CTOs or maybe a particular market, and go deep into the kinds of things that they're interested in. And for me, there's a little bit of a tension in that, a bit like the blog that I've had over the years, it's just whatever I've tripped over, but that doesn't necessarily make a good audience for for helping. With those very rough cut thoughts, was sort of your take on who you would ideally want to help, or who you think we could put it in front of that we could help. But I guess I want to have in the back of my mind that I don't necessarily want to help anyone. I want to help people who we can I guess the best way to put it is the product ladder thing. So this would be a free output that should have some value, and then we can start, if that proves to be a market with some good demand, we can produce sort of more substantial output that they might value. So maybe like the ebooks and the training courses, and that could then build up into products that solve their problems and things like that. Like that's the kind of I'm not doing this just for a hobby. I like doing it, but I'm extremely busy at the moment. So this has to become a bigger thing in some way. And it might take us a bunch of attempts to do it. That's fine. So yeah, with that in mind, where are you thinking the audience?
Yeah, well, I think you've had your fingers on the pulse a little bit more in this area than I have of late, I suppose. But at the same time, I suppose you're right on that part where you mentioned, I guess, everybody has value to provide to someone else. I mean, it's just people don't understand that sometimes, but I think you're right. I think the bit that you mentioned about maybe it's people a couple of steps behind, etc. So, and really, the other thing is as well, through various experiences that you have, and they're not just, like you say, generic life experiences. There are, specific aspects of this. And I know from years ago, actually, trying to build, well, what actually started as a bit of actually custom software that ended up being, sort of moved on, if you like, to sort of a product, but it actually ended up at just 2 places. So it sort of wasn't just custom, but there was a lot of learning during that experience as well. And maybe, as you say, it's and I think one of the issues there, and I'm saying this because it could be relevant, is that it was. And that's what I've felt quite a bit in the past, is it's okay building something, but there's a difference, isn't there? There's a subtle, well, it's sometimes not so subtle difference in being a builder versus, being essentially a product manager, if you want to call it that, or, and certainly a business owner, to be able to take that thing further, because obviously there's a lot of good ideas that everybody has. But there's that quite big leap. And I remember, well, not reading because it was an audio book, but listening to, and I forget the guy's name. He's a fairly well-known sort of tech entrepreneur guy. But anyway, the book is called 0 to 1. I don't know if you've ever read that, Tim. But but it's about the fact that it's that smallest step that you're trying to go from 0 to 1 thing. Who's that? Oh, Peter Thiel. Look, there you go. Of course. Yeah. I knew he was obviously a quite a famous sort of tech entrepreneur. So there you go. And that was actually quite an interesting read, because I think what you've just explained, it sort of had a lot of those elements in there. But to answer your question, I suppose, is that, I think it's really about, it's, I don't know what it's got more than a couple of points to this and perspectives, isn't it? But it's, as you say, it needs to be targeted, because, as we know, being too generalistic. But I guess there's even the smallest steps, as you quite rightly said, could help people that maybe, like you say, are just a few steps behind, or are not even willing to try something.
I'm okay with providing tiny bits of value initially, like as a way of learning and testing. Like, I've put a ton of effort into Schema Explorer, and it's not really made much impact, although I found some stonking bugs with it today.
Right.
We're in the process of preparing for the next year's intake, and that meant duplicating the data and adding a new parent to the whole object graph. And I was poking around in Schema Explorer, and it's a really hard thing to see, but you've got these 2 duplicated sets of records that are parented off different single records, and I could see the crosstalk between the 2 sides where they shouldn't be. They should be duplicated. And also I could see very quickly, the number of records in this table haven't doubled, and the number in this one have.
Oh, right.
Just side by side in 2 browser windows. So yeah, it definitely has some value, but like in terms of audience, market, and impact, so far minimal.
Yeah, but maybe, as you said, the experience that you've been going through, because I know from following your story, or I should say following your adventure, because that's what it sort of is, isn't it, really? Well, it is
an adventure. Yeah,
well, it is, because I know, the times that you've been on the train, coding away, and but I think there's value in, like you said, you might see minimal sort of I don't know whatever you want to call it. I wasn't even going to say success, because that's a bit loaded. But do you know what I mean? But it's the adventure of that. Like, what got you going with that? What got you started with that? Why that? Why not something else? And then obviously all of the paths that you've followed with that I've seen. You've really put yourself out there on Twitter and stuff like that, and sometimes I don't know. You hear so many stories like this with people that started up that, are banging their heads against walls for, what it could be months, weeks, years, but there's
totally years.
Yeah, and then there's a breakthrough. Look at Twitter, for goodness sake. It started as a side project. Well, I know. Yeah. Well, nobody does these days, do they?
Post close.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? It's that sort of thing where there's a lot of different pathways to this, but I don't think anything's ever lost. And that's what I found, with a couple of things that I've been involved in the past, is that that it's not necessarily worked out the way you wanted to, but it's worked out in some way.
Yeah, you always grow. I like the increase your surface area thing.
Yeah. Well, wasn't this Schema Explorer, wasn't it? Was that, I don't know if it was the first, but it was certainly one of the main forays into using Golang, wasn't it, basically, I think?
Yeah, that's not done me any harm.
Yeah. Sorry?
That's not done me any harm. It was a very motivational excuse to learn.
So I think actually you're back to, like you said, the audience. I think that's it, because you get a lot of podcasts basically that and it's great, you listen to them, and I do as well, to inspiring people or companies that have in quotes made it, and that's brilliant. But you don't tend to hear too many. Well, you do. You hear people that, okay, this didn't work out, etc., etc. But maybe it's that pathway, because a lot of it is context, isn't it? Is that people see an end result, but they don't necessarily see.
I like one I heard, which was, I came for the tactics and I stayed for the story. That's definitely something that I'd be keen to do. Is like, we've got some very concrete. Here's some ways that you can achieve more, having listened to our show, but also winding the story of our journey alongside it. So, and that's where the audience question is just so key, because if we don't know who we're trying to help, how do we know what's out there? And like, to an extent, we have to leave it to luck a little bit, but I do want to be really conscious of it, because I don't want to accidentally, if people who aren't ever going to have any money to solve problems get value, that's great. I'm all for that. But I do want to also have an audience as part of it who are willing to put the effort, time, and money into solving their problems, so that I can sustain the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point. I think you're absolutely right, because
I want to have some fun.
I was going to. Well, do you know if it isn't? And I remember reading something literally years ago, and I think it was late '80s. So there you go. And it actually wasn't a tech person at all. Well, I suppose it was. The guy was a very well-known sort of engineer, and did a lot of what do you say? Talk about helping people. It was all to do with and it was back in the 80s, actually probably before that even, but it was all to do with water quality improvement in third world countries and stuff like that. So he developed, and I think he got bought by Dunlop, the people who make tires. But anyway, but he was a bit of a mentor to me back in those days. And funny enough, he said exactly the same thing. Is if you find yourself, it's difficult to hear sometimes, but if you're not having fun, that should be one of the first warnings, basically, that you're not doing what you're really meant to be doing, So,
I've heard that fun is like when something is not too hard but not too easy. So it's not so easy that you should be outsourcing it to someone cheaper, to be blunt, and it's not so hard that you're basically useless at it. Yeah, I like that,
because it's all about growing. Let's face it, what does it gets into sort of like probably a deeper theological sort of like side of things, but what is it that drives us? Well, it's sort of growing, isn't it? And it's as you said, it's stories, it's adventures really that people are really on, whether they say that are not. And I think it is. I think it's growth, and as you say, you're growing. Hopefully, you're providing something to someone else. But ultimately, you need, like you said, it's great if there's, free information that people get and it gives them a boost. Let's face it, we all get that. I mean, how many times you listen to a podcast, you get inspired, you go and check something out. You haven't necessarily paid for that. You haven't done anything like that. So that's great. But as you say, from a sustainability perspective, that we all have to eat. We all have to, and I think there's got to be that balance there somewhere, hasn't there, between here's everything for free, but
the product ladder thing is a revelation for me. Loads of free products that you're really giving value, they attract attention, they're shareable, and then you have some cheap products, and they're the ones where you build confidence of the people that are buying. Like, oh, okay, I bought this thing for $20 and it was actually useful, and then the next, then they're much more likely to part with $1,000 for some private coaching or whatever. And then there are very, very, very few people who have got more money than time to sort their problems out might hire you as a consultant, because you're the person, you're the expert, you're the one with the show, you're the one with the vast audience. And like, I didn't really realize this until relatively recently, but there's a certain bunch of people who have a lot of money who they will always just go to the number one person. Like, oh, well, if I want to learn golf, I'm going to hire Tiger Woods, this sort of attitude. Yeah. If you can become that person in a small market, then your product ladder goes all the way up, and then you can, focus 100% on the thing that interests you and you want to serve. So I want to wrap this up, because we're
that's fine. That's
in danger of doing what we always do and rambling a bit.
Don't worry. And it makes it worse, doesn't it, when it's a little bit late? Well, for me, I call this late. And if you've had a coffee beforehand, then you really do need someone to pull the plug.
Well, I won't actually pull the plug. But I think you might need to. Just to summarize the audience thing. So I think we've got an idea that we want to serve some market that's motivated to sort their problems out. It's going to be technical, because we're both technical. Like, looking at my blog there, I've got the why every team needs a delivery manager, where I talk about the team structure at my current client, the government one. And like, the audience for that could be people who are building or running or part of teams, and they want to like improve on that. That could be a fairly good option, because they're already spending money solving problems. I do kind of want to look up a little bit to people who are. So one of the problems with Schema Explorer for me and my attempts to sell it is I kind of pitched it at programmers, but they're solving problems for other people rather than the people who are having the problems to be solved. If I want to do more productized stuff, then that might be a bit of a challenge. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some fantastic programmer tools, but anyway, I'm just rambling, to be honest. So, show title to go with it, I'm thinking we'll just go with the software should be free that I had in mind initially.
I remember you saying that, actually,
Yeah, because we don't know who it's for yet, so we can't do a keyword-based one. So I'll take this, I'll cut it up, and I will stick it on my blog as a particular category, I think, and then grab the RSS feed and start submitting it and sharing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's organic. I mean, that's it. It's the start of a different path, isn't it? So we won't know all of these things up front. I think that's what maybe is quite good about it, actually, to be honest. Yeah. So
right. So let's wrap up.
Sure thing.
Is there anything you want to say before I finish off?
No. I think that's it. I think it's a good sort of 30,000 plus foot view of some of the idea. Well, it is, isn't it? It's like you could sort of see the outline of the of the country. We'll probably zoom down a bit further next time, and
we might miss the planet on the way down.
well, yeah. I mean, but then there'll be another one. So no, hopefully. That's fine. I'm fine.
Cool. So I think I want to say to anyone who may or may not be listening, maybe like in 10 years we're staggeringly successful and everybody's hanging on our coattails, and you have gone back to episode number 1 to find out how it all started. So anyway, if you're listening nearer to the 10th of July 2019, then go to timwise.co.uk and put your email address in the email subscribe box so that you can be kept up to date with when I publish things and when the stuff changes. And do ping me and David on Twitter to say that you have listened to this so that we know we are not shouting into the dark. And
that the audio is actually working.
Exactly. So, thanks everyone for listening, and enjoy the next show that is going to start on your player immediately now. Right, let's call that a wrap.
Hey, that's great stuff. Well done, sir.